The flight attendant's voice carried no warmth, sharp and sterile, much like the recycled air circulating through the cabin. "Ma'am, I need you to gather your belongings and come with me," she said without hesitation. 17-year-old Maya Richardson looked up suddenly, her heartbeat thudding hard against her ribs. The crowded Boeing 787 seemed to freeze as every passenger turned to stare at her. This had to be a mistake. There was no reason for this. She had a window seat. Her ticket was legitimate, her bag safely stowed overhead, yet the woman beside her, whose piercing gaze matched her cutting tone, had decided Maya didn't belong there. Just moments away from stepping into her dream of attending a summer program at MIT, Maya now found herself publicly singled out, embarrassed, and treated like a suspect instead of a passenger. As she stood and began walking down the aisle, head bowed in quiet disbelief, no one around her understood what they were about to set in motion. What they didn't realize was that Maya's father was watching closely, and his influence traveled at a much higher altitude. The entire airport was on the verge of learning a powerful lesson in consequences, delivered aboard the sleek wings of a Falcon X-900. Meanwhile, Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport pulsed with life, filled with the overlapping sounds of rolling suitcases, urgent boarding announcements, and emotional farewells. To Maya Richardson, that noise wasn't chaos. It was the soundtrack of her future, beginning at 17. She moved through the terminal with a confidence that belied her age, a worn book on quantum computing peeking out of her backpack like a quiet declaration of who she was. Her immediate destination was Boston Logan International Airport, and beyond that, a hard-earned spot in a summer immersion program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, an opportunity she had fought relentlessly to secure. She chose a seat near the towering windows overlooking the tarmac, where airplanes rested like massive metal birds waiting to take flight. Pulling out her phone, she tapped the video call button for the one person she needed to speak to before boarding. Her father's face appeared on the screen, framed by a sleek corner office and a sweeping view of the Manhattan skyline. Caleb Richardson was the kind of man whose presence filled a room, even when that room was digital. Broad-shouldered like the linebacker he once was, he now carried the focused intensity of a self-made tech mogul. "There's my genius," he said proudly, his smile spreading wide. "Ready to show those Ivy League kids what a Richardson can do?" Maya laughed, her voice light and steady. "Dad, MIT isn't Ivy League," she corrected gently. "And honestly, I'm just hoping I don't get lost on day one." "Details," he replied with a wave. "You earned this, B. You've worked harder than anyone I know." Leaning closer to the camera, his expression softened. "You've got everything, right? Your ticket, your ID, that portable charger I made you pack?" Maya rolled her eyes playfully for what felt like the 10th time. "Yes, Dad, I'm fine. I'm a big girl now, remember?" "You'll always be my little girl," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "Even when you're building sentient robots that end up taking over my company," he joked. Then his tone shifted, turning serious. "Just stay aware of your surroundings, okay? Not everyone sees the world the way we do." It was advice she'd heard many times before, shaped by the lived experiences of a black man who had fought his way to the top of a predominantly white industry. Caleb Richardson had built Richardson Advanced Systems from a garage in Queens into a global leader in logistics software. He had given Maya every advantage he could, but he couldn't give her a world without prejudice. "I know, Dad," she said quietly. "I'll be smart. I'll be careful. I love you. I love you more. Now go board that plane and change the world." When the call ended, Maya sat for a moment, wrapped in a warm mix of pride and affection. Her father wasn't just her role model, he was strength embodied. After stopping to grab a bottle of water, she joined the line for Skyway Pacific Flight 739, bound for Boston. Her boarding pass read, Row 14, window seat. She imagined New York City shrinking below her, the concrete jungle fading as she flew toward everything she'd worked for. The line crawled forward, a moving snapshot of humanity. Businessmen in wrinkled suits, a young family struggling with a crying baby, college students buzzing with excitement. Maya kept to herself, earbuds in, a lo-fi playlist steadying her nerves. When her boarding group was finally called, a surge of independence rushed through her. This was it. Her journey had officially begun. She located her row and offered a polite smile to the woman already seated in the aisle. "Row 14?" the woman asked curtly. "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, gesturing toward the window. "Excuse me." The woman, likely in her late 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a string of pearls resting against her neck, looked Maya up and down slowly. Her eyes lingered on Maya's Howard University sweatshirt, her leggings, and the natural curls framing her face. A faint frown tugged at her lips. She didn't move. "That's my seat," Maya said again, her smile tightening just slightly. With a dramatic sigh of annoyance, the woman, later identified as Evelyn Whitmore, finally shifted, muttering under her breath as she lifted her oversized designer handbag from the middle seat. She stood just enough to make things uncomfortable, forcing Maya to squeeze past as their shoulders brushed. Maya slipped into her seat, her excitement dulled but not extinguished by the cold encounter. She tucked her backpack under the seat, fastened her seatbelt, and turned toward the window, watching the ground crew perform their familiar choreography among baggage carts and equipment. She refused to let one bitter stranger steal this moment. This was her time. She was finally on her way. She was airborne in spirit already, even though the plane hadn't moved an inch, and she had no idea how much turbulence awaited her before the wheels ever left the runway. Inside the Boeing 787, the cabin buzzed with controlled disorder as passengers shuffled down the aisle, wrestled carry-ons into overhead bins, and settled in for the short hop to Boston. Maya, having managed to slip past Evelyn Whitmore without further incident, was trying hard to reclaim the excitement she'd felt just minutes earlier. She turned her attention to the window, watching a massive Atlas A900 slowly taxi toward its gate. A true giant of the skies. Evelyn Whitmore, however, had no intention of letting what she perceived as a personal offense go unresolved. After placing her Louis Vuitton handbag on the empty middle seat, positioning it carefully as if it were a paying customer, she began arranging her surroundings with unmistakable territorial intent. Out came a silk shawl, followed by a chilled bottle of Evian and a neatly folded copy of the Wall Street Journal, each item laid out deliberately to create a visible boundary. Maya noticed every movement. She instinctively tried to shrink into herself, pressing closer to the window. Apparently, even that wasn't enough. The corner of her modest backpack, tucked Julianeath the seat in front of her, had, according to Evelyn, crossed an invisible line. "Excuse me," Evelyn said sharply, her voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby rows. "Your bag is touching my foot." Maya blinked and glanced down. The soft fabric of her backpack barely extended into the space Julianeath, the middle seat, by maybe a centimeter at most. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said sincerely, nudging it with her foot and pulling it further back Julianeath her own seat supports. "Is that better?" Evelyn responded with an exaggerated sigh. "I would appreciate it if you kept your belongings within your designated area. Some of us paid a premium for these seats and expect a certain level of comfort." Maya knew that wasn't true. This was standard economy seating, nothing premium about it. But she swallowed the irritation rising in her chest. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Don't give anyone a reason." "Of course," she replied evenly. "My apologies." She slipped her earbuds back in, hoping that would signal the end of it. But Evelyn Whitmore was only getting started. Boarding was nearly complete, and the middle seat between them remained inexplicably empty, a small mercy Maya hoped would serve as a buffer. Just as the cabin door prepared to close, a flight attendant named Linda began making her final checks. Her tired eyes and practiced movements suggested this was far from her first flight of the day. Evelyn immediately waved her down with imperious confidence. "Ma'am," Evelyn said sweetly, her concern clearly manufactured. "I just want to confirm that this middle seat is actually vacant. I'd hate for there to be any last-minute confusion." Linda glanced at her tablet. "Yes, ma'am. Seat 14B is open. Lucky you." She offered a polite but weary smile and started to move on. "Wonderful," Evelyn replied, patting the empty seat. Then she turned her attention back toward Maya as the final passenger boarded and the pre-flight safety video flickered to life on the overhead screens. Maya had her phone in hand, about to switch it to airplane mode after sending one last text to her dad. "Here we go." "You need to turn that off," Evelyn snapped, her voice slicing through the automated announcement. "The door is closed. It's FAA regulation." "I was just about to," Maya said calmly, her thumb hovering over the screen. "The announcement has already started," Evelyn continued, her voice climbing as though she were reciting legal code. "It is a federal offense to interfere with flight operations. Your cellular device could disrupt navigation systems. You're putting all of us at risk with your carelessness." The accusation was so dramatic, so wildly exaggerated, that Maya nearly laughed. Everyone knew modern aircraft were shielded against such interference, and that the rule itself was largely a holdover from outdated technology. Still, rules were rules. "I'm turning it off right now," Maya said, her patience thinning. She tapped the screen and held it up. "See? Airplane mode." But Evelyn wasn't interested in resolution. Like a shark sensing blood in the water, she wanted escalation. She reached up and pressed the call button above her seat. Linda returned within seconds, irritation now written plainly across her face. "Is there a problem, ma'am?" "Yes, there is," Evelyn announced, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at Maya. "This young lady refused to turn off her phone after the cabin door was secured. She was very defiant about it, and her bag is still crowding my space." She drew herself up theatrically. "I don't feel comfortable. I don't feel safe sitting next to someone who shows such blatant disregard for rules and for other people's personal space." Maya's jaw dropped. The claim was a complete fabrication. "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling slightly with shock and anger. "I was turning it off as she spoke to me, and my bag isn't anywhere near her." Linda's eyes moved back and forth from the outraged, immaculately dressed older woman to the black teenager wearing a university sweatshirt. In that brief moment, she recognized two paths, one difficult and one easy. De-escalating Evelyn would take time, patience, and emotional labor. Silencing the teenager would be faster. She made her choice, not consciously malicious, but shaped by efficiency and unconscious bias. "Ma'am," Linda said, directing her voice squarely at Maya, a patronizing edge slipping into her tone. "Please lower your voice. You need to comply with crew instructions." "But I did comply," Maya protested, frustration tightening her chest. "She's lying. I showed her my phone was already in airplane mode." "I don't feel safe," Evelyn interjected smoothly, her voice quivering just enough to sound convincing. "Her attitude is very aggressive. I'm starting to feel genuinely frightened." The word aggressive hit Maya like a punch. It was a label she'd been warned about her entire life, a word often weaponized against black women to invalidate their emotions and reframe them as threats. Sitting there in seat 14, Maya felt the cabin closing in around her. The dream of MIT, the promise of Boston, the open horizon she'd been flying toward, all of it was being smothered by a performance of manufactured fear. In Linda's eyes, Maya was no longer a passenger with a valid boarding pass. She was a disruption. And on airplanes, disruptions are removed. The The situation spiraled quickly, so fast it left Maya struggling to catch her breath. Linda lifted her handset and spoke into it quietly, urgently. Less than a minute later, a man in a crisp Skyway Pacific uniform appeared beside their row. His name was Thomas, the gate supervisor, and his face was carefully arranged into a mask of corporate calm. "Good morning," he said, his low baritone meant to soothe and assert authority. "I'm Thomas. I understand there's been a situation." Evelyn immediately seized the moment, launching into her performance with practiced precision. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice trembling delicately. This young woman was non-compliant with FAA regulations regarding her electronic device, Evelyn continued. When I politely reminded her, she became hostile and aggressive. Her bag is invading my space, and honestly, her entire demeanor feels threatening. I'm traveling alone, and I fear for my safety. Every sentence was a distortion, an exaggeration sharpened into a weapon. Maya sat frozen, watching a false narrative take shape around her, spun effortlessly out of thin air. She looked to Thomas, expecting him to see through it, to ask her what happened, to give her a chance to speak. He didn't. His eyes flicked toward her briefly, but there was no curiosity there, no interest in fairness, just assessment, a quick, dismissive calculation. To him, she wasn't a person. She was a delay, threatening his on-time departure metrics. "Ma'am," he said firmly, directing his attention solely at Maya, "we can't allow disturbances on board. I'm going to need you to step off the aircraft so we can resolve this at the gate." The words hit her like ice water. Off the plane. "But I didn't do anything wrong," Maya said, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay composed. "She's twisting everything. Please, just ask the people around us. They saw what happened." She turned toward the passenger behind her, a man who had witnessed the entire exchange. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Then he looked away, suddenly absorbed in an advertisement for a wristwatch. Across the aisle, a woman adjusted her neck pillow, carefully avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to be involved. In the sealed world of an airplane cabin, bystander apathy was the strongest shield. "We can discuss it at the gate," Thomas said, his tone final. "Right now, you're delaying this flight." The injustice pressed down on Maya's chest, heavy and suffocating. She was being punished for something she hadn't done, on the word of a woman who had decided, from the start, that she didn't belong there. Her father's warning echoed in her mind, no longer abstract, but painfully real. Not everyone sees the world the way we do. "This is insane," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "My program. I have to be in Boston tonight." "Then I suggest you cooperate," Thomas replied, his voice hardening. "Now please gather your belongings." Tears burned behind Maya's eyes, hot with rage and humiliation, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Evelyn Whitmore the satisfaction. Her hand shook as she unbuckled her seatbelt and reached Julia Neath the seat for her backpack, the same bag that had somehow become the catalyst for this nightmare. She stood slowly in the narrow aisle, the weight of every watching eye pressing down on her as the moment sealed itself into memory. She could feel the weight of 100 pairs of eyes on her as she moved. Their stares clung to her skin, judging, branding, discarding her without a word. Evelyn Whitmore, meanwhile, never once looked in Maya's direction. Instead, she calmly adjusted her silk shawl and lifted her Wall Street Journal as though something unpleasant had just been cleared away from her space. In her mind, the matter was settled. She had won. She had successfully wielded her privilege like a weapon, removing someone she believed had no right to sit beside her. Now the entire row belonged to her. As Maya began the slow, humiliating walk toward the front of the aircraft, Thomas following closely behind, instinct took over. Her heart pounding with adrenaline, she slipped her phone into her hand and quietly opened the video recorder. She held it low at her side, not aiming it directly at anyone, just capturing fragments: the carpeted floor, the rows of seats, the hushed murmurs filling the cabin. She didn't fully understand why she was recording, only that something deep inside her insisted she needed proof, evidence of this moment, of this erasure. When she stepped off the plane and onto the jet bridge, the familiar recycled air was replaced by a stale, metallic chill. Behind her, the aircraft door sealed shut with a sharp hiss. The sound echoed with finality. She was alone. Thomas motioned for her to walk ahead of him back toward the gate. The dream of MIT, the excitement, the promise of everything she'd worked for, felt like it was trapped behind that closed door, lifting away without her. The heavy knot in her chest hollowed out into a dull ache. She hadn't been removed for a threat or a mistake. She had been ejected simply for existing. When they reached the gate area, where other travelers lined up for later flights, Maya did the only thing she could think of. She found a quiet corner, leaned against the wall, and called her father. The tears she had forced herself to hold back finally spilled over, silent, hot, and bitter. At that very moment, Caleb Richardson was seated in a meeting that could define the next decade of his company's future. Across from him sat a team of venture capitalists finalizing a 9-figure funding deal for a groundbreaking AI-driven logistics platform. The figures on the screen were staggering, the result of years of relentless effort and sacrifice. But when his phone buzzed with a call from Starling, everything else faded. He had one unbreakable rule. He always answered when his daughter called. "Gentlemen, please excuse me for a moment," Caleb said evenly, rising from his chair and walking toward the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. He accepted the call. "Hey, Starling, you should be in the air by now. Everything okay?" The sound that answered him wasn't words, it was a broken sob. In that single devastating sound, the billion-dollar deal, the investors, the boardroom, all of it ceased to exist. There was only his daughter. "Maya," he said softly but urgently. "What's wrong? Talk to me." "Dad, they kicked me off the plane," she managed, her voice thick with disbelief and tears. Caleb's body went completely still. "What?" he said sharply. "What do you mean they kicked you off? For what?" Through gasping sobs, Maya told him everything. The woman named Evelyn Whitmore, the complaint about her backpack, the manufactured panic over her phone, the dismissive flight attendant, the supervisor's decision, the walk down the aisle, the silence of the passengers who looked away. As he listened, a cold, controlled fury began to rise inside Caleb, climbing from his chest into his throat. It was a familiar anger, one he had spent a lifetime mastering, burying Julianeth polished suits and boardroom composure. But this was different. This wasn't business. This was his child. They had targeted his daughter, humiliated her, reduced her to a problem to be removed, treated her like a criminal because someone decided she didn't belong. In that moment, all the money, influence, and success he had accumulated felt meaningless. What good was any of it if he couldn't protect his own child from this kind of cruelty? "Where are you right now, Maya?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm back at the gate," she said quietly. "Gate B-24. The plane is still here. I can see them getting ready to push back." Caleb turned toward the window, not just at the Manhattan skyline, but south, toward the airport. Something primal shifted inside him. A line had been crossed. For years he had played the game, outworking and outmaneuvering competitors, navigating racism, both subtle and overt, with precision and restraint. He had followed the rules, worn the right masks, chosen his battles carefully. But they had come for his daughter. The game was over. "Okay, Starling," he said, his voice now sharpened with unmistakable authority. "Listen to me carefully. Stay exactly where you are. Don't talk to anyone." He paused. That video you recorded, I want you to post it. Put it on TikTok, on Twitter, everywhere, every platform you have." "Exactly," Caleb said calmly. "State precisely what happened. Use the airline's name. Use the flight number, 739. Don't sound angry. Just be factual. Tell your story." He paused. "Can you do that for me?" "I think so," Maya replied softly, sniffling. "Good girl," he said gently. "I'm going to take care of this. I promise." "I love you." "I love you too." The call ended. Caleb slipped his phone into his pocket and turned back toward the conference table. The venture capitalists looked up, expecting the meeting to resume. It didn't. "Gentlemen, I apologize," Caleb said, his voice flat and hard as stone. "A family matter has come up that requires my immediate and full attention. We'll need to reschedule." Before anyone could respond, before surprise even had time to register, he was already moving, striding out of the room and through the offices of Richardson Advanced Systems like an approaching storm. His assistant, Julian, a hyper-efficient young man who prided himself on keeping pace, hurried after him. "Julian," Caleb said without slowing, "cancel my entire afternoon. All of it. And get Andrew on the phone. Now." Andrew Cole had been Caleb's chief pilot for over a decade. Julian fumbled with his phone, fingers flying, then handed it over. "Andrew," Caleb said the moment the line connected, his tone leaving no space for questions. "Where are you?" The reply came back steady and professional. "Good morning, Mr. Richardson. We're at the Teterboro hangar. The Gulfstream is fueled and ready. We were finishing pre-flight checks for your London trip tomorrow." Teterboro Airport in New Jersey was the primary private jet hub serving New York City. Caleb's mind was already racing far ahead. "Change of plans," he said. "I need you airborne immediately. File a flight plan for JFK." There was a brief pause. "JFK, sir? We don't usually land there, the commercial traffic." "I'm not asking," Caleb cut in, his voice cold and absolute. "I need you in the air, and I need clearance to land at JFK. Tell them it's a time-sensitive emergency transfer. Tell them whatever you need to. When you're on the ground, I'll give you further instructions." He stepped into his private elevator, descending toward the garage where his car was already waiting. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The world was about to learn what happened when someone pushed a devoted father who also happened to possess the resources of a small nation. They had gone far too far. Air traffic control at JFK was one of the most complex logistical ballets on Earth. Hundreds of aircraft, thousands of lives, all orchestrated by a small group of controllers in a darkened room. Their voices flowed calmly, a steady rhythm of clearances and commands. At 10:45 a.m., an unexpected request entered the system. A Falcon X-900, one of the fastest and most luxurious private jets in existence, was requesting an immediate landing slot. The controller on duty, a veteran named Frank Santini, raised an eyebrow. Private jets usually avoided JFK's chaos, preferring smaller airports like Teterboro or Westchester. But this request carried a priority tag, citing a time-sensitive ground emergency. Frank shrugged. He'd seen stranger demands from the ultra-wealthy and found a narrow opening in the flow. He cleared the jet to land. At the same time, Skyway Pacific Flight 739 finally pushed back from the gate. Inside the cabin, Evelyn Whitmore was enjoying the aftermath of her victory. She had claimed all 3 seats, 14A, 14B, and 14C, spreading her belongings like a monarch securing territory. She sipped her Evian, completely unaware of the digital firestorm her target had ignited in the terminal, or the very real one forming on the tarmac. The Boeing 787 taxied into position, joining a short line for departure on runway 17. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we're number 3 for takeoff. Should be airborne in about 5 minutes. Looks like a beautiful day flying up to Boston." In the cockpit, the captain and first officer completed their final checklist. They noticed a Gulf Stream touching down smoothly on a parallel runway, but gave it no further thought. Nearby, Caleb Richardson sat in his car in the cell phone lot, the line still open to his pilot. "Are you on the ground, Andrew?" "Touchdown complete, Mr. Richardson. We're on taxiway Echo, awaiting instructions for parking at the private hangar." "There will be no parking," Caleb replied grimly. "Do you see Skyway Pacific Flight 739? There was a brief pause as Andrew, a former Air Force pilot not easily rattled, peered through the cockpit window. "Affirmative. I have visual. Boeing 787, third in line for runway 17. "Good," Caleb said. "Here's what I need you to do." He inhaled once, steady and controlled. "Contact the tower. Tell them you have an engine malfunction and require immediate clearance to cross the active runway." "Tell them it's an emergency," Caleb said evenly. "Once you're on that runway, I want you to stop." There was stunned silence on the other end of the line. When Andrew finally spoke, his voice was tight with disbelief. "Sir? Stop? As in, bring the aircraft to a halt on an active runway?" "You heard me," Caleb replied, his tone unwavering. "Position the jet directly in front of Skyway Pacific Flight 739. Block it. Shut down the engines. Then you wait for my call." "Mr. Richardson," Andrew said carefully, "I need to advise you. This would violate multiple FAA regulations. All traffic would be grounded. The airport would effectively shut down. The consequences are mine," Caleb cut in, his voice hard as granite. "I will triple your lifetime salary. I will personally cover every fine, legal fee, and license suspension that comes from this. I will ensure your career survives intact. But you will do this. This is not a request." Andrew Cole took a slow, steady breath. He had flown for Caleb Richardson for 10 years. He knew the man to be demanding but fair, intense but principled. He had never heard this voice before. This wasn't anger. It was resolve. A line had been crossed. There was no turning back. "Roger that, Mr. Richardson," Andrew said, professionalism snapping firmly into place. He switched frequencies and addressed the tower. "JFK Tower, November 1, Romeo Whiskey. We have an engine flameout indication and need to cross runway 22 immediately to clear the taxiway, declaring an emergency." In the control tower, Frank Santini's pulse jumped. An engine issue, even on the ground, was an automatic priority. "November 1. Romeo Whiskey," Frank responded. "You are cleared to cross runway 22. All departing traffic on 22, hold position. I repeat, all traffic hold." From the cockpit of Flight 739, the pilots watched as the Gulf Stream, sleek, white, and impossibly elegant with its bold black stripe, rolled smoothly onto the runway ahead of them. The maneuver itself was flawless. Then the jet stopped. Not slowed, not paused. Stopped, no more than 30 yards in front of them. The Falcon X-900 now sat perfectly perpendicular to the runway, a polished wall of metal and intent. Moments later, the engines spooled down, heat shimmering briefly before silence settled in. In the tower, Frank Santini was shouting into his microphone. "November 1, Romeo Whiskey, what is your status? You're blocking an active runway. You need to clear immediately." The reply came back calm, unnervingly so. "Tower, we are unable. Engines are non-responsive. We are working the issue." Aboard Flight 739, the passengers, braced for takeoff, felt the plane roll forward briefly, then stop completely. "Folks," the captain's voice came over the intercom, now tinged with confusion. "It appears there's a disabled aircraft on the runway ahead of us. We're going to be holding here for a while. We'll update you as soon as we can." A collective groan rippled through the cabin. Another delay. Evelyn Whitmore huffed sharply, irritated that her carefully controlled travel experience had been disrupted yet again. She glanced out the window and saw the private jet sitting there, an image of extravagant inconvenience. To her, it was just an example of useless luxury. She had no idea it wasn't a status symbol. It was a message, a blockade, a promise forged in 50 tons of aluminum and jet fuel. And it was there for one reason, and one reason only. Her. While the surreal standoff between a private Gulfstream and a commercial Boeing captivated the bewildered attention of JFK's air traffic controllers, a far more agile and far more dangerous storm was unfolding elsewhere. Not in the sky, but online, in the sterile anonymity of the Gate B-24 waiting area. Maya Richardson stared down at her phone, her father's words echoing in her mind. Tell your story. The instruction was simple, yet it felt enormous. Her hands trembled, not from fear now, but from leftover adrenaline and humiliation. She wasn't an activist. She wasn't someone who lived her life online. She was a private person, a student. The idea of exposing her pain to the world felt terrifying. She took a steadying breath. Then she began. She fought the urge to vent, to rage, to let her emotions spill across the screen. Instead, she followed her father's example. Precision, facts, calm clarity. She selected the short video clip, the audio chilling in its cold corporate finality, and began typing slowly, deliberately. She named the airline. She listed the flight number, 739. Then she hesitated and added the name of the woman in seat 14C, Evelyn Whitmore. It felt like crossing a line, but fairness demanded it. This hadn't been an abstract injustice. It had been personal. The woman had acted deliberately, and actions came with accountability. Finally, she added the hashtags, small digital anchors, sending her story out into the current. Dubbed Aurora Airlines, Yanjasht Flight 739, flying while black. As a final quiet addition, she attached the destination tag, Boston Bound, a small but devastating reminder of the dream that had been so casually put at risk. Maya reread the post one last time, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. Then she pressed post. For a full minute, nothing happened. The screen sat there in digital silence, her words floating in the void, unseen by anyone but her. Doubt crept in fast and sharp. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe no one would care. Maybe this would disappear just like she had. Then a notification appeared. A single like, then another. This time a comment. I am so sorry this happened to you. We believe you. Another followed almost immediately. Disgusting behavior. Airlines need to do better. What began as a trickle quickly became a flood. The story, stripped down to its raw facts, struck a nerve. It was simple, it was clear, and it was infuriating. A prominent travel blogger with over 1 million followers came across the post and reshared it instantly, adding his own blistering commentary. I've documented airline discrimination for years, but this is a new low, forcing a 17-year-old honors student off a plane based on the lies of a prejudiced passenger. Completely unacceptable. From there, the story was amplified again, this time by a well-known social justice advocate who placed it squarely within the long, painful history of racial bias in America. Within 20 minutes, his Aurora Airlines was trending across New York. Within 40, it was trending nationwide. The view count on Maya's video skyrocketed. 50,000, 200,000, 500,000. Then, 1 million. Her story had escaped the quiet anonymity of the terminal and made its way back onto the plane itself, into the stifling cabin of the now-stalled Flight 739. What had once been mild irritation curdled into something darker. The air conditioning struggled to keep up. The captain's vague, repetitive updates about a ground issue did nothing to calm nerves. Passengers fanned themselves with safety cards, voices rising as they complained to flight attendants whose polite smiles were starting to fracture. In seat 21, a bored college student named Evan scrolled absently through TikTok. He nearly swiped past a video showing jet bridge carpet and a familiar corporate voice, until the caption stopped him cold. Skyway Pacific Flight 739. He shot upright, heart thudding. He double-checked his boarding pass. His stomach dropped. This wasn't just familiar. It was this flight. He read Maya's caption carefully, each detail snapping into place like a puzzle he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He remembered her now, the quiet girl with curly hair, the older woman with the air of entitlement, the swift, unquestioned removal. At the time, he'd felt a twinge of sympathy, but like everyone else, he'd assumed there must have been a valid reason. Now the truth landed hard. Guilt washed over him for his silence. Without hesitation, he shared the video via airdrop to the passenger beside him. "You need to see this," he whispered. "This is why we're really delayed." The story spread through the cabin, not like a wildfire, but like electricity. It jumped from phone to phone, carried by hushed conversations and wide-eyed looks of disbelief. In a single, collective moment, the mood of the cabin shifted. The private jet on the runway was no longer the enemy. The problem wasn't outside the plane. She was inside it, sitting comfortably in row 14. The general murmur of complaints died away, replaced by a low, simmering buzz of anger. Eyes that had been fixed on seatbacks now turned in unison, locking onto Evelyn Whitmore. She remained blissfully unaware, absorbed in her newspaper, radiating the detached confidence of someone who believed herself untouchable. It was that arrogance that made what came next inevitable. A man in seat 15C, a broad-shouldered construction foreman heading to a job in Boston, rose to his feet. His frame filled the aisle as he held up his phone, Maya's post glowing on the screen. When he spoke, he didn't shout. His voice was deep, steady, and carried effortlessly through the cabin. "Evelyn Whitmore?" The name hung in the air like a charge. Evelyn looked up sharply, irritation flashing across her face. "I beg your pardon?" "This post is about you," the man continued coolly. "It says you lied. It says you got a 17-year-old girl kicked off this plane because you didn't like her." He paused. "Is that true?" The color drained from Evelyn's face, replaced by a blotchy red. This is outrageous," she snapped. "It's slander, fake news." But the dam had broken. The woman seated behind them, the one who had earlier buried herself in her magazine, lowered it slowly and spoke up, her voice steady. "Fabrication?" she said. "I saw the whole thing." "I saw everything," the woman continued, her voice sharp and unwavering. "You were cruel to her from the moment she sat down. You complained about her backpack. You snapped at her over her phone. She was polite the entire time, and you treated her like a criminal." She paused, then added pointedly, "Aggressive? You were the only one being aggressive?" That was the spark. Voices erupted throughout the cabin, overlapping and relentless, the plane transforming into an impromptu courtroom. "We all saw it," someone shouted from the back. "You just wanted the whole row to yourself," another accused. "Shame on you," an older woman murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. Evelyn Whitmore recoiled into her seat, her composure finally cracking. Her face twisted with disbelief and rising panic. These were her people, well-dressed, affluent travelers who looked like her, spoke like her, lived in her world. They were supposed to side with her. She had counted on their silence. She had miscalculated. She had mistaken apathy for agreement and failed to account for something far more dangerous, their buried sense of fairness. Now she was surrounded, trapped inside a tribunal at 30,000 feet with nowhere to retreat. The flight attendants attempted to restore order, but their calls for calm were ignored. Whatever authority they once held had evaporated the moment they escorted Maya off the plane. Elsewhere, in his car near the airport, Caleb Richardson watched the storm he had helped ignite grow into something unstoppable. The hashtags were exploding. Maya's story was now leading major news sites. Skyway Pacific stock had already begun to dip in after-hours trading. Public opinion had shifted decisively. That battle was over. Now it was time to finish this. Caleb placed a call, not to a hotline or spokesperson, but directly to the personal cell phone of a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist at the New York Times, a woman he knew through years of shared charity work. "Rachel," he said calmly, "it's Caleb Richardson. I assume you've seen what's unfolding at JFK. I have an exclusive for you." He paused deliberately. "I can explain exactly why my Falcon X900 is currently parked on runway 17, but this story isn't about me." He let that settle. "It's about my daughter, Maya. It's about what happens when an airline, a flight crew, and a passenger forget their humanity. And it's about what a father is willing to do to remind them. Physics teaches that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, but human consequences are rarely that neat. Sometimes a single act of casual cruelty sets off a response so vast, so all-encompassing, that it resembles not a reaction, but a flood. One that washes away careers, reputations, and carefully constructed facades with merciless force. The grounding of Skyway Pacific Flight 739 was more than an inconvenience. It was a fulcrum, a moment in time that sent shockwaves outward, fracturing lives far beyond the runway. And for Evelyn Whitmore, the architect of her own downfall, the reckoning began in a pressurized cabin at 30,000 feet and followed her all the way to the ground. The unified condemnation from her fellow passengers had been shocking, humiliating, but it was only the opening act. When the flight was finally canceled and ordered back to the gate, Evelyn believed the worst was behind her. She imagined slipping away unnoticed, disappearing into the anonymity of the city like a ghost. She was wrong. The jet bridge door opened not to quiet relief, but to blinding light. Camera flashes exploded like strobe lightning. The roar of shouted questions hit her with physical force. "Mrs. Whitmore, why did you have a teenager removed from the flight? Is it true you lied to the flight crew? Evelyn, look over here." She froze, caught like a deer in headlights at the center of a global media ambush. The world she had curated, built on control, privilege, and insulation, collapsed instantly. In its place was chaos, raw and predatory. She tried to shield her face with her oversized designer handbag, the same one she had guarded so fiercely, but it was useless. Her image, panicked and exposed, was already streaming into millions of homes. Online, the reckoning was even more brutal. By nightfall, Evelyn Whitmore was no longer a private individual. She was a symbol, a meme, the ultimate Karen. Her face flooded social media, plastered with captions dripping in contempt and outrage. Her professional life, 3 decades of ruthless networking, polished cruelty and ambition, collapsed in hours. The website for her consulting firm, Whitmore Strategic Group, was overwhelmed by coordinated waves of 1-star reviews. Clients ranging from Fortune 500 corporations to elite luxury brands began severing ties with carefully worded but unmistakably final emails. Her business partners, alarmed as their own livelihoods came under threat, convened an emergency meeting, one she was not invited to attend. The outcome arrived shortly after in the form of a terse press release. Evelyn Whitmore had been permanently and immediately removed from the firm she helped found. Yet the most devastating blow, the one that truly hollowed her out, had nothing to do with her career. It was deeply personal. The trip to Boston had been meant as a fragile olive branch, the first tentative step toward repairing a years-long rift with her only daughter, a young woman who had slowly pulled away from Evelyn's suffocating sense of entitlement. Throughout the afternoon, Evelyn had called and texted relentlessly, her messages growing more frantic with every unanswered attempt. There was only silence. Then, late that night, her phone vibrated one final time. It wasn't a call. It was a single message, and it cut deeper than anything else that day. Attached was the now viral video of Maya, followed by a short text from her daughter. I spent years trying to explain why we couldn't have a relationship. Thank you for showing the entire world in under 60 seconds. I think I have my answer now. This is the last time you'll ever hear from me. Evelyn sat alone in the sterile quiet of her multi-million-dollar Park Avenue apartment. Outside, the city lights glittered like 1,000 judgmental eyes. She had won her battle for seat 14B, but in the process, she had lost everything that actually mattered. She was an island now, stranded by her own prejudice. For Skyway Pacific, the fallout was nothing short of historic. Inside corporate headquarters, chaos reigned. The public relations team issued a bland, pre-scripted statement about investigating an incident, an effort as futile as trying to extinguish a wildfire with a squirt gun. On every major news channel, footage of Caleb Richardson's Gulfstream blocking a Boeing 787 played on repeat, a perfect visual metaphor for the airline's sudden and total loss of control. The Thomasettes responded with ruthless efficiency. Aurora's stock ticker plunged. Wall Street hates uncertainty, but it despises public scandals that expose ethical rot even more. Analysts downgraded the stock from buy to sell, citing catastrophic damage to brand trust. By the time the closing bell rang at the New York Stock Exchange, nearly $1 billion in company value had evaporated. The consequences rippled downward. Thomas, the gate supervisor, and Linda, the flight attendant, were the first to fall. They were terminated via a cold, impersonal email, their years of service erased in a keystroke. They had made a calculated choice rooted in bias and convenience, and the corporation they believed they were protecting sacrificed them with the same detached calculation. But the public wasn't satisfied with low-level scapegoats. Under the crushing pressure of a nationwide boycott and the looming threat of a shareholder revolt, the board of directors forced the CEO to resign. His replacement, a seasoned crisis management specialist, wasted no time. At her first press conference, she didn't simply apologize. She announced a sweeping overhaul. Skyway Pacific would partner with the Open Horizon Justice Coalition, a leading civil rights organization, to completely rebuild employee training from the ground up. She unveiled a multi-million-dollar compensation fund for passengers who could substantiate claims of discrimination over the past 5 years. And she publicly issued a direct apology to Maya Richardson, along with an offer of a full 4-year scholarship to any university of her choosing. In a final, deliberate statement of intent, Caleb Richardson publicly thanked the new CEO, then declined the settlement. Instead, he instructed that the entire amount be donated to the National Scholars Equity Fund. It was never about money, it was about principle. For Caleb Richardson, defiance came at a cost. The FAA, unable to ignore such a brazen violation of aviation protocol, levied a historic $1.5 million fine. His pilot, Andrew Cole, had his license suspended. Caleb accepted the penalties without complaint. He paid the fine immediately and met with Andrew, not to dismiss him, but to promote him. Andrew was offered oversight of the entire Richardson Advanced Systems aviation fleet, a role he could grow into during his suspension with full pay. Loyalty, Caleb believed, had to flow both ways. Rather than capitalize on his newfound notoriety, Caleb turned it outward. He announced the creation of the Richardson Travel Equity Initiative, a nonprofit foundation seeded with an initial endowment of $100 million. Its mission was singular and uncompromising: to provide legal and financial support to anyone who experienced discrimination while traveling. He had taken a personal injustice and transformed it into a shield for countless others. And for Maya Richardson, the reluctant catalyst at the center of it all, the experience became a crucible, one that didn't break her, but forged the shape of the future she was always meant to claim. Maya was suddenly pushed into a national spotlight she had never asked for and never wanted. She agreed to just one interview, on camera, with a respected national journalist. When she appeared, she wasn't the shaken, humiliated girl captured on the jet bridge. She was composed, sharp, and unmistakably brilliant. She spoke with clarity about unconscious bias, about the constant exhaustion of moving through spaces that weren't built with you in mind. In doing so, she became more than a headline. She became a symbol of grace under pressure. When she finally arrived at MIT, her entrance was nothing like the quiet, anonymous beginning she had once imagined. Students whispered as she passed. Professors stopped to shake her hand, admiration clear in their expressions. What had happened to her wasn't merely an interruption in her journey, it was a recalibration. Sitting in her first lecture on advanced algorithms, staring at dense equations sprawled across the board, she saw something new. She no longer saw just math or code. She saw systems, patterns, embedded assumptions, hidden bias. In that moment, Maya understood that her love for technology and her emerging commitment to justice were not two separate callings. They were one and the same. The world had tried to sideline her, to shrink her, to put her in her place. Instead, it had revealed just how much space she was capable of occupying. And it ignited a determination to rebuild what was broken, one line of code, one deliberate act of courage at a time. What began as an ugly moment of casual cruelty inside the narrow confines of an airplane seat became a nationwide reckoning. Yes, it is a story about the abuse of power, but more importantly, it is a story about how power can be used. It reminds us that for every act of prejudice, there exists the possibility of an equal and opposite response rooted in love, conviction, and defiance. Caleb Richardson's actions were extreme, something only a billionaire could execute. But the force behind them was universal, a parent's unshakable instinct to protect their child. Maya's experience forced an entire industry to look inward, to confront the biases hiding in plain sight. And while this story centers on one family, its truth reaches far beyond them. It speaks to the quiet injustices millions of people encounter every single day. So the question becomes unavoidable. What would you have done? As a passenger, would you have spoken up? Have you ever witnessed something like this and chosen silence instead? This story is proof that one voice, when paired with courage and conviction, can spark real change. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want to be part of a community committed to telling stories that challenge us, inspire us, and push us to be better, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications.